On today's show, going to be joined by Clipper radio host Adam Auslund to talk the offseason, the new look Clippers, and the early reviews of the Intuit Dome, which just opened up. Going to be talking about it all on today's Locked On Clippers.
You are Locked On Clippers, your daily Los Angeles Clippers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, sir. You were locking in with the Clips. Thank you for making Locked On Clippers the first listen of your day, your team every day. I'm your host, Darian Vaziri, born and raised in LA and going into my 20th season as a Clipper fan this fall. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Dime Dropper Pod or subscribe to my own YouTube channel, Dime Dropper, for even more LA Clipper, LA Sports, and NBA content. And Locked On Clippers, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Let me know about your thoughts on this episode, everything we're going to talk about. And this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the best place to get great deals last minute on tickets for any event. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Today's episode, welcoming him back. We haven't had many two-time guests in my reign as host of Locked On yet. Law Murray has been one of them, and I really can't think of any other ones just off the top. But this guy has been very busy this summer, especially the last couple of weeks, getting every single big Clipper media member or fan that is active on social media that you can think of on Clippers Talk, which he has now brought to the YouTube side, and I will be joining him on that after this. So after this and Locked On NBA, then you got to go to Clippers Talk. Adam Auslund, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Darian. Yeah, we got a little bit of a home and home here today. I'll start on your channel with Locked On. Then part 2 will be at Clippers Talk, the new YouTube channel, where I'm just trying to keep up with you young guys. You know, I see all the videos you've been doing for years. Locked On is serious. I'm trying to make it the same way with now the YouTube side for Clippers Talk.
Yeah, it's been great. Obviously, Brian Seaman was the episode that got the most traction, and we all love Brian. We all wanted to hear from him, and a bunch of other great guests as well, even guests that we've had right here on Locked On Clippers like Jamal and Kelly. But let me just talk to you now. This is the first time we've had you on since literally Zubac's injury during the season. This offseason, it's been an eventful one for us. Paul George, the 2-1-3 era has come to an end. He's gone to Philly. We brought in Derrick Jones Jr. Nico is back. Give me your whole thoughts on the offseason, man, going into the Intuit Dome here.
I feel like they've rebounded, so to speak, after losing such a huge critical part of their team. And one of the best Clippers of all time, you can say, in Paul George. I think he's a top 5 Clipper. I think you have mentioned that before on the show. Yeah. But if you're going to respond to losing someone that's that key to your squad, this was the way to do it, because I think they're building something where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts by starting with an identity. And I can't say, and you could give me input on this, but I don't know exactly what their identity was in the 2-1-3 era. They were a really talented team, and at their best, they could beat anyone. And at their worst, when they weren't locked in, when they weren't focused, when they didn't bring that intensity, they could look like a bottom 10 team in the NBA. Night to night, you didn't really know what you were getting. I think, that era will be defined mostly because of the injuries and the inconsistencies going on due to that. But now I see right away they bring in Derrick Jones Jr., then Batum's coming back, then Chris Dunn. And you start to feel like, okay, this is how Lawrence Frank wants to insulate Kawhi Leonard, by having a more defensive-oriented group with a lot of different wings and guards and guys who can guard out there and take some of the pressure and some of the focus off of Kawhi having to do so much defensively. As good as I thought he was last season, maybe his best defensive year as a Clipper. I know you brought up the 2021 season. I agree with you there. Those two are in the conversation. I think at this point, you want to put less on the shoulders of Kawhi Leonard when it comes to having to guard some of the best players on the opposition each and every night. And I just want to see this team finally lean into defense, because they came into last year. Darian, you remember, they said the goal was to be a top 5 defense, to get back to playing defense. Well, that lasted about 2 weeks. And then the last 71 games of last season, they were ranked 21st in defensive rating. So there's been slippage on that end that we have noticed really from the start of seasons towards the end of it, where there's been this deterioration, this gradual decline. I think some of it is due to being an older team and knowing that We're going to be defined by how we do in the playoffs. That's all that matters. But now I just think they have more pieces and more of a mindset to really lean into having that defensive identity and that DNA and that makeup coming into training camp this time that hopefully is going to bear fruit in the regular season and throughout.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I want to get more into our new squad later in the episode. But first, I just want to hear your thoughts on the Paul George departure. I know you've probably, beat it to death on Clippers talk, but I just want to hear your thoughts on this show because I don't get the chance to get too many guests on, and I want to hear from other people that have watched the Clippers. I mean, losing Paul George, how'd you feel about it? Because I know you've been a big defender of Paul George over the years, and as a lot of us have been, that's just what kind of happens when he's on your team. But he obviously had so many people waiting for him to make a mistake or have bad games and jump all over him, especially after 2020. But how do you feel about the loss of him? And then, of course, Russell Westbrook as well. That, even though it might not be the biggest loss on court, depending on what you think of Westbrook and the way he had such a rough postseason, but the presence of Westbrook and including what that means for us as people in the media and just, all that is going to be felt for sure.
Yeah, it was someone that still had a high usage rating in his 20 minutes per night after they brought in James Harden. And there's a lot of that to be made up for now coming into this year. We don't know what's going to happen with Bones Highland. I mentioned Chris Dunn coming to the team, Norman Powell, Terrence Mann. A lot of those guys are just going to have more opportunities and have the ball in their hand much more. Look, I was a fan of Russell Westbrook. The stands, not so much, just because we took so much incoming. When I felt like I was criticizing a player the same way I was any other player on the roster, yet there was just this wave. What's the old Jon Snow gif from Game of Thrones when he's the lone guy out there in the field with the sword in the Battle of the Bastards, and there's just this volume of attackers coming towards him? That's how I felt often. Whenever I said anything about Russell Westbrook, it was taken from a different angle than any other player that you would try to give objective criticism on when it came to the Clippers. That was a little bit frustrating, but I don't have a bad word to say about Russ, who did sacrifice his game, who I think in some ways, especially when he first came over, he showed off different components of his game that we didn't see with the Los Angeles Lakers. He was attacking space more often. He wasn't settling for those jumpers. He wasn't settling for those three-point shots. I did feel like at some points last season, he would regress back to that a little bit more. But overall, I didn't love the fit, obviously, with James Harden. I think most people understood that. And I said immediately, you have to start Terrence Mann next to James Harden. You can't run these guys out there with Russ next to James Harden in the starting lineup. And they started 0-5 with those guys. Then Russ takes a seat on the bench. They end up going 26-5 over a 31-game stretch, one of the best regular season stretches, really the best regular season stretch in the history of the franchise. But unfortunately, things did end on a low point. As much as there was that sacrifice from Russell Westbrook, when they needed him to really ramp back up and have a bigger role in the playoffs, because Kawhi was a shell of himself in the 2 games he played in, he went 8 for 42 the last 5 games of that series against the Dallas Mavericks. That was a historically bad series if you go off of efficiency. Nobody had been that bad in a 5-game stretch before. Just felt like he was forcing the issue a little bit too much. And I know Russell Westbrook had struggled in the past, even in his prime in the playoffs. I just think that erratic play style, it doesn't lend itself to playoff basketball. You have to play at a slower pace. You have to be slower, more methodical out there, more decisive out there. And as good as he was, I thought the series against Phoenix in 2023 was the best series he had in 5 years in the playoffs. Things swung the other way against Dallas last season in that 6-game series. So I appreciate Russ and his time as a Clipper. Wish him well, unless he's taking on the Clippers with the Denver Nuggets now. It's an interesting fit. But in going to the bigger fish who left the pond with the Clippers now and Paul George, mixed feelings, I think, because you're right. I defended Paul George because he gave all the evidence and ammunition you would need to defend him after what happened throughout 2021 in that playoff run, where he took over after Kawhi was out in that Game 5 in Utah, where everybody said at the time, he can't hide behind the muscles of Kawhi Leonard anymore. What's going to happen to playoff P, pandemic P? All the nicknames were out there, and he balled out, and I think had 37 or 39 that Game 5. They brought it back, came back down 25. against Utah in the craziest game that I've ever witnessed at Crypto.com Arena. They move on to the Western Conference Finals. I thought overall he was good against Phoenix. I understand the missed free throws, but he had another great Game 5 on the road to extend that series. And so he built up a lot of good equity with me, and I think a lot of the fan base. But then we didn't get to see him in the playoffs really, outside of that one play-in game in Minnesota where I think he had 32, but then he missed the game against the Pelicans due to COVID that next season, and obviously missed the series following that against the Phoenix Suns, where then Kawhi would miss it after the first two games. So our last experience with Paul George kind of bookended his Clippers tenure with the bad taste in your mouth from 2020, from him not performing well enough, to say the least, in the bubble. And then, inexplicably only taking 15.8 shots per game or whatever it was against the Dallas Mavericks in a series without Kawhi Leonard. That just can't happen. You have to go out firing at least. I don't think he was the best player in that series. I don't think he was the second best player in that series for the Clippers. I don't think he was the third best player in that series for the Clippers. I think he was fourth behind James Harden, Ivica Zubac, and Terrence Mann. Mann's impact on Luka Doncic kept them in that series. Luka shot, I think, 40% from the floor, 30% from the outside. He gave him a lot of problems, and that was probably the best defensive series we saw from Terrence Mann when everybody was waiting kind of for him to, and I know you talk about this a lot, but show that he could be your number one perimeter defender on a championship team. To me in that series, Terrence Mann lived up to the hype with his defense against Luka Doncic. He was that good. So Paul George, he had two good games, I would say. Game 1 was very solid. Game 4 was magnificent, especially the first half, obviously. And then that corner 3, the only shot he made. And he didn't take many in the second half, but it was huge. It was pivotal. So that's how he goes out as a Clipper. And that's tough. It's tough to defend Paul George after that because you felt like I've always felt like he's one of the most talented players to ever play the game. And it just happens to be between the ears for him. And you don't know what you're going to get variance-wise from night to night. He could play like a top 5 player to a top 10 player to a top 40 player, night to night. The consistency, the lack of consistency from Paul George can be frustrating. He's still an all-time Clipper. I wish him well, unless he's taking on the Clippers like he will be November 6th at Intuit Dome. But I don't think, mission wasn't accomplished. I'm not putting it all on Paul George. It was injuries. It was all these things. But if you put that aside, he still needed to be much better than he was in 2020. He still needed to play much better than he did against Dallas in this last playoff series because Dallas was ripe for the picking. The Clippers seemed to have the advantage in that series, even with lacking Kawhi Leonard, the real Kawhi Leonard, if he just played his part. And he wasn't able to do that. So I will always appreciate the guy as a Clipper. He's one of my favorite all-time Clippers. I think he's a nice guy. I think he's a good guy overall. I just think sometimes, the podcast stuff and him calling the Clippers the B team in LA, that sealed his fate in my mind that he will get a majority of boos when he returns to Intuit Dome. Having said that, at some point, I think they should retire his jersey as a Clipper too.
Yeah, that was a conversation we had with Jamal when he came on the show. And it's hard for me to go against anything you said. I agree with basically everything. But coming up, going to be talking more about this new Clipper team. Just how good are we going to be? Are we better, like some people think, with the subtraction of Paul George? Going to be talking about that coming up. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. In my case, so many different little jobs going on, I sometimes lose track of what I need to do. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it and have your thoughts organized and your schedule organized. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, back here with Adam Auslund, post-game and pre-game host on the radio for your LA Clippers. Has been doing his, I don't want to call it a victory lap, but the Clipper media lap.
Is that a world tour or a girls tour? I'm trying to just be as active as possible right now on social media, Darian.
Yeah, and speaking of active, we got some players that are active on the defensive end this summer to help our team. You mentioned the defense first mindset. You know, you talked about the 2-1-3 era, and I feel as though when we got Paul George and Kawhi, it should have been a defense first mindset. It should have been a defense first roster. And to be honest, the starting lineup kind of was. You had Pat Bev, Kawhi, Paul George, and Mo Harkless to begin the 2-1-3 era, and with Zoo behind them. That's pretty good defensive personnel right there. But what I think we realized over time is Kawhi and Paul George, given that they're our two best offensive players, they're not going to want to take the primary assignments. No number one option seems to, in the NBA, take the primary assignment defensively on the other end. So we're going to need some guys. And that's why when Pat Bev was always out those first 2 years, it felt like we just fell off a cliff defensively and intensity wise. And then Terrence Mann kind of filled into that role. And, you know, the 2021 playoff run was just special. But this offseason, it seems as though we have taken a stand and said, we're going to be a defense first team. We're putting defensive guys around Kawhi and James Harden. Let me ask you this. What signing are you most excited about?
I mean, I'd be lying if it wasn't Nico Batum, just because he's raised his statures being an all-time Clipper fan favorite and all first team role player as a Clipper. He's only played 3 full seasons as a Clipper. It feels like more because the fans embrace him so much, and he's just the perfect gentleman, Frenchman. He is just the type of guy you need to win a championship. He is that glue guy. He said when he came over, he wanted to be that guy. After it looked like he was going to be out of the league with the Charlotte Hornets, and the Clippers took a chance on him and helped revitalize his career, and it seems like he's felt like maybe he's in debt to them, or they felt the other way after trading him last season. If we can ever get this guy back, we're going to do so. I think that was the big hang up for a while in that move to get James Harden. It was whether or not they would include Nico Batum. And then watching him play heavy minutes for France during the Olympics, where he's playing more than Wemby and these young guys and hitting critical shots as you would expect and picking up SGA and Dennis Schroeder. You just feel like, man, he's 36. But when he plays and gives them his 20 minutes per night, the Clippers are winning those minutes. So I'm excited for Nico, but also Chris Dunn, because you mentioned Pat Bev a little bit ago. I think they need somebody that plays with a little bit of edge out there. And while Chris Dunn can be a quieter guy than Pat Bev, as most are, they're not going to be talking and chirping that much. We know he can mix it up a little bit too. I think he got into it with Russ a few years back. But Chris Dunn is not afraid to go at guys and just embrace whatever assignment he's given that night. And he can guard ones, he can guard twos, he can guard threes at times. I just think that's somebody that I'd love to see, because I didn't think he'd turn into this player coming out of Providence. I thought for sure with the way he was balling out there in the tournament that he'd be more of an offensive player in the NBA, that he'd be somebody that was like a 6-man Kemba Walker type coming off the bench and catching fire. I never expected him to be a defensive first player. So I like that he adapted, that he figured things out, that he was willing to be coached. I just think he's coming into a point in his career, I think he's 29 or 30 now, where he's always a team first guy. He's bounced around a little bit. He wants a little bit more security. He's got a 3-year deal now with the Clippers. And the last 2 years with Utah, he shot about 40% on just about 135 attempts from the outside, but you'll take that. He's been trending the right way. He doesn't take a lot of bad shots. He doesn't force shots out there. It's either he's got a really nice floater or he'll take a catch and shoot 3 when guys sag off of him and give him that space. So I think he's a decent connector. I think he's the right type of veteran player at this point of his career to be a Clipper. And he helps instill and just crystallize that defensive identity that I think they're going for. Both of those guys I love. I know Cam Christie, you probably weren't thinking of him when we talk about new Clippers here because he's a rookie. He was drafted. He wasn't brought in, but he was. He's coming over from college, and I can't say enough about the way his shot looks, Darian. It's somewhere between Michael Porter Jr. and Devin Booker with that shooting stroke.
Wow.
The height, the way the apex he gets to on the release, it is pretty. It's so pretty, as Noah Eagle would say, referencing White Men Can't Jump on the Olympics call with D. Wade. My guy Noah, shout out. But I am infatuated with a guy that also, I think he took 12 shots in his first Summer League game. It doesn't look like they're going to have to do the Luke Kennard thing with him, where if he doesn't shoot, they're pulling him off the floor. He might stay aggressive. He might feel like he has a green light if he ever gets minutes this season. But
that's what I was going to ask. Do you think he's actually going to play?
I think if he does, it's probably a warning sign that there have been a rash of injuries and the Clippers have been ravaged by injuries again, or he's just lighting up the G League to an extent nobody expected, where he's getting 25 a night or something like that. But his defense kind of impressed me a little bit. That was the knock on him. He's long, he's wiry, but they thought he was too small. He took on the challenge. I posted multiple clips at Fall Out of May on X during Summer League of him really playing very good one-on-one defense, sliding, moving his feet, doing all the little things. So I think the Clippers, as your friend Jamal Christopher would say, they got one here in Cam Christie. And the pedigree, too. I've always liked his brother. I bet he plays a lot more now under J.J. Redick. A lot of Lakers fans were complaining about him not getting enough minutes. Max Christie, I think Cam Christie could be better than him because he's learned under him. And I think he's just a little bit further along right now for such a young player that took three-pointers a really high volume in college in his 1 year.
Yeah, I'm not a Laker fan, but I'm a big believer that Max Christie should get more minutes. He's a good player. And you didn't mention Derrick Jones Jr. in there, who obviously was a starter for the Mavericks, a team that made the finals. I think a lot of Clipper fans, I would say I'm on the court probably most excited about him, but deep down it is Nico Batum because of everything you said. He's just beloved. And, I saw you talked about the team store jersey sales and how Harden's number 1 in jersey sales, and then Kawhi 2, and then Nico 3. To me, that actually makes a ton of sense because, as you said, so many people have Kawhi jerseys. Harden really won a lot of people over with that playoff run, so people are getting his jersey. And then Nico, I would think Nico or Zoo, but there's a thing about centers, unless they're stars. I feel like people don't want to get centers jerseys. They're not as marketable.
Shoes either. Ask Shaq back in the day.
Exactly. So
his Reeboks were cheap.
Exactly. So Nico Batum, I actually am going to get a Nico jersey. I plan on it. That's my next jersey. But the Derrick Jones Jr. edition is going to be great because we've lacked athleticism for some time. To have somebody that is an athlete that can also guard point of attack. We'll probably be linking up with James Harden for some amazing highlights on some lobs. But let me ask you one question before we move on to the final segment about the Intuit Dome. Are we better, though? Because listening to you sound so excited. This is a new leaf. We have a defense-first mindset. Chris Dunn is going to do this. It sounds all good, but at the end of the day, we only have 2 reliable shot creators, Kawhi and James Harden. Are we a better team without Paul?
The lack of shot creation is a concern. Now, Norman Powell's still on the team. We'll see what happens with Kevin Porter Jr. You mentioned, Derrick Jones Jr. to me has to continue to progress with his three-point shooting. And some of what happened throughout the playoffs where he ended up shooting 37% for the Dallas Mavericks, even with a really bad NBA Finals shooting performance, some of that has to carry over into this season. It could, because he's still 27 coming into his prime, but he has been, I think, a 32% three-point shooter, something in that range throughout his career. So what happened in the playoffs in that small sample size, you can say it was an outlier. He stepped up. He was big time. We know how good of a defender he is and how he can fly. I think he has one of the best nicknames in sports with airplane mode. But in order for them to be better than they were last season, are you saying higher than the 4th seed in the Western Conference overall regular season record? Because I can't make that argument right now. I can't. There's too many unknowns. Losing Paul George, as much as, he could contradict himself at times, and it felt like they could have used a little bit more consistent leadership from him and just consistency overall, he's still an all-time Hall of Famer. He's still a great player. Yeah, he's 34. I'm interested to see how it goes in Philly when he has those down games, how much they're going to get on him. But there's no way to make the argument you lose Paul George and get better, I think, right now. Could they collectively find a way to be much better defensively? Because the formula is this to me. If they're anywhere between 7th and 10th in defensive rating, and then somewhere between I don't know, 11th and 13th offensive rating, then you're in business. If you can still have a top 10 net rating, even if it's 9th or 10th in the league, because defense travels and is always there with you. That's what I like, is a regular season floor raiser. If you're always given that effort on the defensive end and they have the guys to do it, shots come and go. You mentioned the lack of shot creation. Even with those guys, some nights they're not going to have it. But if you hang your hat on your defense, if that's there, you're in games. The Clippers in the past had won, I think in the 21-22 season, without Kawhi Leonard all year, with Paul George for just 30 games, they were 8th defensively. That's the type of effort I want to see from the Clippers on that end. If they can do that, well, their offense is just good enough, is just a little bit better than middle of the pack, I think they have a chance at being out of the play-in. That's the goal to me. Yeah. I agree with Jamal Christopher. If you can get 6th, that might be their ceiling with the guys on the team currently. Now, if Kawhi Leonard can't play more than 60 games, if James Harden can't play more than 60 games, obviously that lowers everything. If you put a number on how many games Kawhi is going to play this season and James Harden, and then ask me where the Clippers end up, I can give you a more realistic prediction here, but it's always going to come down to health of your stars and Kawhi Leonard. Right now, look, I have my concerns. 3 straight years, it's the same knee going back to the ACL, it's the same leg going back to the tendinopathy. That has to be concerning. He's 33. Players who are injury prone don't tend to get more healthy as they get older. That's typically not how it goes. I have my hopes, though, because it sounded like he really wanted to play in the Olympics. Sounds like he's been training hard. Mo Bamba is trained with him this offseason, that Kawhi will hit the ground running and be ready to go for training camp and be ready to lead this team to start the season. But until we get 10 games in with Kawhi, and I know there's some back-to-backs right away, I can't really judge the full ceiling for this team, as good as I think they could be and how much I think they could over-exceed some of the expectations out there, which tend to be very low by some. I think Bleacher Report had them 12th in the West or something like that recently. Until I see where Kawhi's health is at, and not just him being healthy, but being at that high of a level where he was last season, it's hard to prognosticate with the Clippers.
Yeah, I can't blame you. It's always going to be the case. I think we're one of the hardest teams to rank for people around the league just making their preseason predictions. But coming up, talk about ceilings. We literally have a new ceiling over our heads, the Intuit Dome. We're going to be talking about the earliest reviews and what you think of our amazing building to close the show. Coming up. I got to tell you a little something about Game Time. Game Time is the best place to get great deals on tickets last minute. And Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Game Time has a 50% off tickets to the Dodgers at Diamondback game on Labor Day. And let me tell you something, Dodger fans end up making Chase Field look like Dodger Stadium. So that's a great deal, Dodger fans. If you're a Dodger fan, go over to Game Time. There's limited availability and supply, but get your tickets while they last for the Labor Day special. All you got to do is take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets or MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so now to close out the show, let's talk a little bit about the Intuit Dome. Adam, I know you talked to Jamal and several people that have gone to the concert, the Bruno Mars concert, or maybe even the Olivia Rodrigo concert. But let me know your thoughts on the Intuit Dome and just briefly what this does for us going forward. I mean, how exciting is this upcoming season for us because of this place, your new place to work?
This is as excited as I've been in years for something out unrelated to free agency, a rookie, a signing, a trade, a move. This is the Clippers finally being welcomed home for the first time. This is what everybody has been asking for. and Steve Ballmer has delivered, guys. I got a private tour of it about a week and a half ago. I can't overstate or overhype just how beautiful this arena is. It just starts with this. It's simple. What's the most important part about an arena or a stadium? Being closer to the action.
Yep.
And that is something you have in spades at Intuit Dome. The highest seat up feels, I'm not kidding, it feels twice as close as it did at Crypto. Now, I was there when they were setting up the floor, so I didn't see the court. I saw the floor for Bruno Mars. But I can tell you, even in the 300s or whatever they are labeled, there's really not a bad seat in the house. And I say that with some earnesty. I really believe that. It is something to behold. It is the nicest arena stadium in the world, and I think it's going to hold that title for a good 10 years. And I'm going to say what I said yesterday with Jamal Christopher. After what I heard from Brian Seaman, with them doing a test run with 6,000 fans and getting up to 120 decibels with just 6,000 fans scattered throughout the arena, so you're going to get almost 3 times that for a sellout Clippers game. If it gets to 120 decibels with 6,000, what the hell is it going to be with almost 18,000? I think you're going to get the loudest arena in the NBA. I think people are going to figure that out very soon. I'm putting my prediction on that. Now, that means Clipper Nation has to bring it. They have to bring that noise. But I think that there is a possibility there that you get a higher decibel level at Intuit Dome than anywhere else. From what I heard from the Bruno Mars concert, the sound's spectacular. It's much closer to what you hear at like the Forum, which is a much better venue for concerts than the sound level you'd hear at Crypto.com Arena. Everything has been positive so far. I know there was that hang up with the face scan technology. Great. I mean, any arena that opens, that first night, there's going to be some troubleshooting going on. But I didn't hear anything last night with Olivia Rodrigo and the Sauerkraut or whatever it is. I forget what the album's called. I think this is something that's going to be smoothed out by the time October 23rd happens. And the amenities there, it's like nothing else, and it's ours. And we get to establish a personality and a heart and soul of what that arena is going to feel like and create a culture there with Clipper Nation. That's what excites me, aside from the fact that we're all going to find out together how loud that place can really get at the same time.
Yeah. I think we have 2 preseason games there, but the first night we're really going to find out is that night against the Suns, October 23rd. Mark it on your calendars. Adam, this was a great time as usual. We're going to be flipping it over to Clippers talk on Adam's side.
Oh, I'm putting you on the hot seat, Darian. I got some questions now.
Oh, let's go. Okay. Let people know where they can find you and throughout the season as well.
I'm at Follow Adam A on X. At Clippers Talk is where you find the YouTube. I'm posting everything there. Pre-game shows, post-game shows, one-off episodes, streaming live. I'm doing a lot on the YouTube channel now because it seems like that's the place to be. I don't know. There's this meteorite coming for our business. So I'm going to make sure to stay ahead of it right now and go to where the audience is. So at Clippers Talk on YouTube, at Follow Adam A on X.
There we go. And you can follow me on Twitter or X and Instagram at Dime Dropper Pod. Subscribe to my own YouTube channel, Dime Dropper, for even more LA Clipper, LA sports, and NBA content. I know it's a little bit of a sensitive subject, but I decided to make a highlight reel of all of Paul George's game winners with the Clippers because I didn't want another outlet to post it, just at the Clipper game winners. So you want to check that out. It's on my channel. We still can boo them, guys. I'm still going to boo them. But listen to the second half of our conversation over on Clippers Talk. And of course, make sure you make Locked On NBA your second listen every day as well. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let us know what you thought in the comments section of the episode and the things that Adam said about the team. The age-old proverb continues, go Clippers.